Jason Carter had always been the kind of man who thrived on competition. He had clawed his way up from a modest background, fueled by an insatiable drive to prove himself. At 28, he was already one of the youngest division heads at Apex Enterprises, a Fortune 500 company known for its relentless pursuit of innovation and market dominance. Jason's reputation as a cold, calculating strategist had earned him the respect of his peers and the fear of his rivals. He was a man who never allowed emotions to cloud his judgment and who never, ever lost. Yet there was one person who had managed to get under his skin in a way no one else ever had. Evelyn Parker, the CEO of Solstice Innovations. From the moment their paths first crossed at a technology summit 3 years ago, their rivalry had been nothing short of legendary. Evelyn was everything Jason was: driven, intelligent, and utterly uncompromising. But where Jason was cold and methodical, Evelyn was fiery and passionate. She had a reputation for thinking outside the box, for taking risks that others wouldn't dare, and for succeeding where others had failed. Their professional lives had become a constant chess game, each move calculated to outwit the other. Whether it was bidding on contracts, launching new products, or securing high-profile partnerships, Jason and Evelyn always seemed to find themselves on opposite sides. And with each encounter, their rivalry grew more intense. The media loved to play up the drama, dubbing them the Titans of Tech, but for Jason, it was more than just headlines. Evelyn Parker was a threat to everything he had worked for, and he hated her for it. Or at least, that's what he told himself. The latest battlefield in their ongoing war was a multi-million-dollar government contract to develop a cutting-edge cybersecurity system. Winning this contract would not only secure the future of their respective companies, but also solidify their reputations as the best in the industry. Both Jason and Evelyn knew that this was a make-or-break moment, and neither was willing to back down. The competition reached its peak at the annual Global Tech Conference, where both Apex and Solstice were slated to present their proposals. The conference was the most prestigious event in the industry, drawing top executives, investors, and government officials from around the world. It was here that Jason and Evelyn would make their final bids for the contract, and it was here that their rivalry would be put to the ultimate test. As Jason prepared for his presentation, he couldn't help but think about Evelyn. He had seen her earlier that day, surrounded by her team, her presence commanding and confident. She had looked every bit the formidable opponent he knew her to be. But there had been something else too. A certain light in her eyes, a spark that had caught him off guard. For a brief moment, he had felt something he hadn't expected: admiration. But he quickly pushed the thought aside. This was war, and there was no room for anything but victory. When the time came for his presentation, Jason delivered it with his usual precision. His proposal was flawless, his arguments compelling, and his demeanor unshakable. As he stepped off the stage, he knew he had given it his all. But as Evelyn took the stage after him, he felt a knot of unease in his stomach. Evelyn's presentation was nothing short of spectacular. She spoke with passion and conviction, her ideas innovative and daring. The audience was captivated, and Jason found himself grudgingly impressed. He had always known she was brilliant, but seeing her in action like this, he couldn't deny the pull she had over the room. And he realized with a start over him as well. Afterward, Jason found himself restless, unable to shake the feeling that something had shifted. He decided to take a walk to clear his head, but the crisp night air did little to calm his racing thoughts. As he wandered through the bustling city streets, lost in thought, the skies suddenly opened up, releasing a torrent of rain. Unprepared and soaked to the skin within minutes, Jason ducked into a small cafe to escape the downpour. The cafe was quiet, a cozy refuge from the storm outside. As Jason shook off the rain and ordered a coffee, he glanced around the dimly lit room, and his breath caught in his throat. There, sitting by the window, was Evelyn Parker. She was alone, her gaze focused on the rain splattering against the glass, lost in thought. For a moment, Jason considered leaving. After all, the last thing he wanted was to be trapped in close quarters with his rival. But something made him hesitate. Before he knew what he was doing, he found himself walking over to her table. Evelyn looked up as he approached, surprise flickering in her eyes. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the air between them thick with unspoken tension. Then, to Jason's astonishment, Evelyn smiled, a small, almost shy smile that he had never seen on her before. "Jason," she said, her voice soft and inviting. "What are you doing here?" Caught off guard, Jason found himself stammering slightly as he responded. "Just escaping the rain? Mind if I join you?" Evelyn gestured to the seat across from her. "Be my guest." What was meant to be a brief, awkward exchange quickly turned into something more. The conversation started cautiously, both of them careful not to stray into dangerous territory. They talked about the weather, the conference, and the latest industry gossip, safe, impersonal topics that allowed them to skirt around the real issue at hand. But as the minutes ticked by and the rain continued to pour, the barriers between them began to erode. Jason found himself surprised by how easy it was to talk to Evelyn. Away from the boardrooms and the spotlight, she was different, softer, more open, and incredibly insightful. She spoke about her life, her childhood, and the struggle she had faced as a woman in a male-dominated industry. She shared stories of her early career, the mistakes she had made, and the lessons she had learned. For the first time, Jason saw Evelyn not as a rival, but as a person. And what he saw, he liked. As the hours passed, Jason realized that he had revealed more about himself than he had intended. He spoke about his own journey, the challenges he had faced, and the sacrifices he had made. He found himself confessing things he hadn't told anyone in years, his fears, his doubts, and the loneliness that came with being at the top. Evelyn listened, not with the shrewd calculation of an opponent, but with genuine empathy. By the time the rain stopped, Jason felt as though he had stepped into a parallel universe, one where Evelyn Parker was not his enemy, but something else entirely, someone who understood him in a way no one else did. But as the cafe began to close for the night, reality came crashing back. They exchanged polite goodbyes, but the atmosphere between them had changed irrevocably. Jason left the cafe with his mind in turmoil, torn between the professional rivalry that defined his life and the undeniable connection he had felt with Evelyn. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity as both Jason and Evelyn prepared for the final stages of the contract bid. The competition had never been fiercer, and the pressure was mounting. But something had changed in the wake of their unexpected encounter. Jason found himself thinking about Evelyn constantly, replaying their conversation in his mind, wondering what she was thinking, feeling. The clarity and certainty that had always guided him were now clouded by something he couldn't quite define. Despite this, neither Jason nor Evelyn allowed their personal feelings to interfere with their work, at least not overtly. They continued to engage in their professional battle with the same intensity as before, each pushing the other to new heights. But there was a new dynamic at play, an undercurrent of tension that neither could ignore. Their interactions became more frequent, more charged. Meetings that had once been purely business were now laced with unspoken emotions. Every glance, every word seemed to carry double meaning. Their rivalry, once purely about business, had taken on a deeply personal dimension, and both of them felt the strain. As the deadline for the contract decision approached, Jason found himself growing increasingly conflicted. He had always prided himself on his ability to keep his emotions in check, to never let anything or anyone get in the way of his goals. But now, for the first time, he was beginning to question that approach. His feelings for Evelyn were real, undeniable, and they were threatening to unravel everything he had worked so hard to build. Evelyn, too, was struggling with her own conflicting emotions. She had spent years building her company, her reputation, and her defenses, falling for Jason Carter, the man she had spent years competing against, was not part of the plan. But the more time she spent around him, the more she found herself drawn to him, not just as a rival, but as a man who understood her, challenged her, and, to her surprise, cared for her in a way she hadn't expected. The night before the final presentations, Jason couldn't sleep. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions, all centering around Evelyn. He had spent the past few weeks trying to push his feelings aside, to focus on the task at hand, but it was no use. The connection he felt with her was too strong to ignore. Desperate for clarity, Jason went for a walk, hoping the fresh air would help clear his head. But instead, he found himself standing in front of Evelyn's hotel, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he shouldn't be here, knew that seeing her now could complicate things even further, but he couldn't stop himself. Before he knew it, he was knocking on her door. Evelyn opened the door, her eyes widening in surprise when she saw him. "Jason," she said, her voice a mix of confusion and something else, something he couldn't quite identify. "What are you doing here?" "I don't know," he admitted, his voice raw. I needed to see you." Evelyn stepped aside, allowing him to enter. The room was dimly lit, papers and laptops strewn across the table, a testament to the long hours she had been putting in. But in that moment, none of it mattered. They stood facing each other, the tension between them thick and palpable. "I've been thinking about you," Jason confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't get you out of my head." Evelyn's breath hitched, her eyes searching his for answers. "Jason, this is complicated. We're supposed to be rivals. Whatever this is, it's dangerous." "I know," he replied, taking a step closer. "But I don't care. I can't pretend that what happened between us didn't change everything. I can't go back to the way things were." For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, the weight of their unspoken feelings hanging in the air. Then slowly, tentatively, Jason reached out and took Evelyn's hand. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. Evelyn's breath caught as she felt the warmth of his touch, the connection between them undeniable. Without thinking, Jason leaned in and kissed her. It was a kiss filled with all the passion, frustration, and longing that had been building between them for years. And in that moment, everything else faded away. There were no companies, no contracts, no rivalry, just the two of them, alone in the quiet of the night, their hearts finally laid bare. The kiss deepened, both of them giving in to the emotions they had fought so hard to deny. It was electric, intense, a culmination of years of tension and unspoken desires. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless, their eyes locked in a silent understanding. But reality soon intruded. As they stood there, still holding each other, the enormity of what they had done began to sink in. They had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Both knew that their relationship, whatever it had become, could destroy everything they had worked for. But at that moment, neither cared. For the first time in a long time, they felt alive. "I don't know what happens next," Jason said, his voice hoarse. "But I do know that I don't want to lose you." Evelyn nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of determination and vulnerability. "We'll figure it out," she whispered, resting her forehead against his. "Together." As they stood there, holding each other, both knew that the road ahead would be anything but easy. Their worlds were about to collide in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But for now, in the quiet of that hotel room, they allowed themselves to just be a man and a woman, finally giving in to the feelings they had fought so hard to deny. And whatever the future held, they knew they would face it together. Jason woke up to the soft light of dawn filtering through the hotel curtains. For a moment, he was disoriented, his mind struggling to reconcile the intense emotions of the previous night with the stark reality of morning. But then he felt the warmth of Evelyn's body next to his, and it all came rushing back. The kiss, the confessions, the decision to face whatever was coming together. As he watched Evelyn sleep, her features softened in slumber, Jason felt a strange mix of contentment and dread. He had never imagined that he would find himself in this position, lying next to the woman who had been his fiercest rival, his greatest challenge. But it was undeniable that something had shifted between them. The enmity that had defined their relationship for so long had given way to something deeper, something far more complicated. He knew that their decision to pursue whatever this was between them would have serious consequences. Their companies were on the brink of the biggest deal of the year, and any hint of a personal relationship between them could jeopardize everything. But as Jason traced a gentle finger along Evelyn's jawline, he knew that he couldn't walk away. Not now. Evelyn stirred, her eyes fluttering open. When she saw Jason, a small smile tugged at her lips. "Morning," she murmured, her voice husky with sleep. "Morning," Jason replied, leaning down to brush a kiss across her forehead. For a moment, they lay there in silence, savoring the quiet intimacy of the moment. But soon, the weight of reality began to intrude. "We need to talk," Evelyn said, her tone more serious as she sat up and pulled the blanket around her. "Last night it changes things. For both of us." Jason nodded, his expression mirroring her concern. "I know. We can't let anyone find out about this, Evelyn. Not now, not with the contract on the line." Evelyn sighed, running a hand through her tousled hair. "I agree, but that's not the only issue, Jason. We need to figure out what we are. We've been rivals for so long, it's hard to just shift gears like this." Jason reached out and took her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "We'll figure it out. Whatever this is, it's real, and I'm not willing to walk away from it. We'll keep things quiet until the contract is settled, but after that, I want to see where this goes." Evelyn looked at him, her gaze searching his. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, and it terrified her as much as it thrilled her. "Okay," she said finally, her voice soft but resolute. "We'll keep it quiet, but we have to be careful, Jason. One wrong move, and everything could come crashing down." With that understanding, they began to carefully navigate their new reality. The stakes were higher than ever, and the line between personal and professional was becoming increasingly blurred. But for now, they had made their choice. They would take this risk together. Over the next few days, Jason and Evelyn slipped back into their public roles with a precision that was almost frightening. In meetings, they were as competitive and combative as ever, their sharp words and strategic maneuvers leaving no hint of the connection that had formed between them. To the outside world, nothing had changed, but beneath the surface, their relationship was evolving in ways neither of them could have predicted. Every interaction was laced with an undercurrent of tension, every glance charged with the weight of their secret. The stolen moments they managed to carve out, a brief touch as they passed in a hallway, a lingering look during a meeting, only heightened the intensity of their connection. It was a dangerous game they were playing, and both knew that one misstep could spell disaster. But the risk only seemed to fuel their desire. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of negotiations, Jason found himself unable to stay away from Evelyn. Under the guise of needing to discuss a minor detail about the contract, he texted her, asking if they could meet. She responded with a single word, "Yes," and they agreed to rendezvous in a secluded corner of the hotel's rooftop bar. The night was cool, the city's skyline glittering in the distance as they stood close together, the low murmur of the other patrons fading into the background. Jason handed Evelyn a glass of wine, his fingers brushing hers in a way that sent a shiver down her spine. "You know, we're playing with fire," Evelyn said quietly, her eyes locked on the twinkling lights below. Jason took a sip of his drink, his gaze fixed on her. "I know, but I can't seem to help myself." Evelyn looked at him then, her expression a mix of frustration and longing. "Neither can I. But what happens if we get caught? We could lose everything, Jason." Jason set his glass down and reached out, cupping her face in his hands. "Then we'll deal with it together. I'm not backing down from this, Evelyn. Not now, not ever." She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, her resolve, crumbling under the weight of his words. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never felt like this before." "Neither have I," Jason confessed, his thumb brushing across her cheek. "But I'm not letting that scare me away. Whatever this is, it's worth fighting for." Evelyn opened her eyes, and what she saw in Jason's gaze gave her the strength to push aside her fears, at least for the moment. She closed the distance between them, her lips finding his in a kiss that was both desperate and tender. They clung to each other, as if trying to hold on to the fragile connection they had found amidst the chaos of their lives. But as they parted, Both knew that the path they were on was fraught with danger. The next few weeks would be critical, and they would need to be more careful than ever. But for now, they were together, and that was all that mattered. Despite their best efforts to keep their relationship hidden, the strain of secrecy began to take its toll. Rumors started to circulate within both companies, whispers of late-night meetings and unusual behavior. Jason and Evelyn did their best to maintain a facade of normalcy, but the closer they grew, the harder it became to keep their emotions in check. One afternoon, as they were reviewing the final details of their proposals in a private conference room, Evelyn noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. Jason's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Linda, had been watching them closely, her gaze flicking between them with a suspicious intensity. Evelyn felt a prickle of unease. Linda was known for her discretion, but she was also fiercely loyal to Jason. If she suspected something, it wouldn't be long before others did too. "Jason," Evelyn said quietly, her voice tinged with worry. "I think Linda might be onto us." Jason glanced over at his assistant, who was busy organizing files at her desk outside the glass-walled room. His expression hardened slightly. "I've noticed it too. She's been asking more questions than usual, and I've caught her watching us a few times." "What do we do?" Evelyn asked, her anxiety growing. "If she figures it out, the whole office will know within days." Jason considered their options, his mind racing. "I'll talk to her," he said finally. "But we need to be even more careful from now on. No more meetings like this during the day. We can't afford to give anyone a reason to suspect anything." Evelyn nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of their situation. "Agreed. But Jason, if it comes down to it, and people start talking, we need to be ready to face the consequences." Jason's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I know, and we will, together." But even as they reaffirmed their commitment to each other, both knew that the walls were closing in. The pressure was mounting, and it was only a matter of time before something, or someone, would force them to confront the reality of their situation. The weeks that followed were some of the most intense of Jason and Evelyn's lives. The final decision on the contract was looming, and both companies were pushing their teams to the limit. Tensions were running high, and every interaction between Jason and Evelyn was charged with the dual weight of their professional rivalry and their secret relationship. The strain was beginning to show. Jason was more on edge than ever, snapping at his team when things didn't go according to plan. Evelyn, too, was feeling the pressure, her normally unflappable demeanor cracking under the weight of her divided loyalties. They were both acutely aware that the stakes had never been higher, not just for their companies, but for their relationship as well. Then the unthinkable happened. It was a Friday afternoon, and Jason was in his office, reviewing the final proposal that Apex would be submitting the following week. The phone rang, and he answered it without thinking, his mind still focused on the task at hand. "Jason," came Linda's voice, her tone urgent. "We have a problem." Jason's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" "There's a rumor going around that you and Evelyn Parker, that you two are involved," Linda said, her voice low. "It's already reached the board, and they're demanding answers. If this gets out, it could destroy the deal." Jason felt like the ground had dropped out from under him. He had known this day might come, but he wasn't prepared for it to happen so soon or so suddenly. "Who started the rumor?" he asked, his voice tight. "I don't know," Linda replied, "but it's spreading fast. You need to do damage control, Jason, and you need to do it now." As Jason hung up the phone, his mind was racing. He needed to talk to Evelyn to figure out how they were going to handle this. But even as he dialed her number, a sinking feeling settled in his gut. This was the moment they had both been dreading. The moment when their carefully constructed facade would come crashing down. When Evelyn answered, Jason could hear the tension in her voice. "Jason, what's going on?" "I'm hearing rumors that people are talking about us." "They are," Jason confirmed, his tone grim. "Linda just told me it's reached the board. We're in trouble, Evelyn. We need to figure out how to deal with this, and fast." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I knew this was going to happen," Evelyn said finally, her voice heavy with resignation. "We've been so careful, but it was only a matter of time before someone noticed." Jason clenched his jaw, frustration and anger bubbling up inside him. "We can still get through this, Evelyn. We just need to be smart about it. We'll deny everything, say it's just baseless rumors. We can still save the deal." But even as he said the words, Jason knew that it wouldn't be that simple. The rumors had already taken root, and the damage was done. Their relationship, whatever it was, had put everything they had worked for at risk, and there was no easy way out. The days that followed were a whirlwind of damage control and tense negotiations. Jason and Evelyn did everything they could to quash the rumors, issuing statements and attending meetings where they denied any personal relationship between them. But the tension between them was palpable, and their colleagues and competitors alike could sense that something was amiss. Despite their best efforts, the damage was done. The board members of both companies began to question their judgment, and the once ironclad deal started to unravel. Investors grew nervous, and whispers of internal discord spread like wildfire. The contract, which had once seemed like a sure thing, was now hanging by a thread. The final blow came during a critical meeting with the board of Apex. Jason had gone in prepared to make his final pitch, determined to salvage the deal. But as he stood before the board, outlining the merits of the proposal, he could see the doubt in their eyes. They were no longer listening to his words. They were scrutinizing him, looking for signs of weakness, of distraction. And then, one of the board members spoke up, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Mr. Thompson, there have been concerns raised about your personal conduct, particularly in relation to Evelyn Parker. Can you address these concerns?" Jason's heart pounded in his chest. He had expected this question, but that didn't make it any easier to answer. "There's nothing to address," he said, his voice steady. "Ms. Parker and I are professionals, and any suggestion otherwise is baseless." But as the words left his mouth, he knew they rang hollow. The board members exchanged glances, their skepticism evident. The damage had been done, and no amount of denial could undo it. The meeting ended with the board voting to delay the contract, citing concerns about potential conflicts of interest. Jason left the room feeling hollow, knowing that the delay was as good as a death sentence for the deal. Apex's competitors would seize the opportunity, and the contract would likely slip through their fingers. When he returned to his office, he found Evelyn waiting for him. One look at his face told her everything she needed to know. "It's over, isn't it?" she asked quietly, her voice tinged with sorrow. Jason nodded, the weight of their failure pressing down on him. "Yeah, it's over." They stood there in silence for a long moment, both grappling with the enormity of what had happened. Their relationship, their secret, had destroyed everything they had worked for, and now they were left to pick up the pieces. "I'm sorry, Evelyn," Jason said finally, his voice thick with regret. "I never wanted this to happen." Evelyn shook her head, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "Neither did I, but maybe it was inevitable. We were playing with fire, Jason, and now we're paying the price." Jason reached out to take her hand, but she pulled away, the distance between them suddenly insurmountable. "Maybe it's better if we don't see each other for a while," she said, her voice breaking. "At least until the dust settles." Jason wanted to argue, to fight for what they had, but he knew she was right. The fallout from their relationship had already caused enough damage. Continuing down this path would only make things worse. "Okay," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "If that's what you want." Evelyn nodded, a single tear slipping down her cheek. "It's not what I want, Jason, but it's what we need to do." With that, she turned and walked out of his office, leaving Jason standing there alone, the weight of their choices crashing down on him. The fallout from their relationship had cost them everything: trust, respect, and the deal that had once seemed like the pinnacle of their careers. And now, as he stood in the wreckage of what they had built, Jason realized that he had lost the one thing he had never expected to find: his heart. In the weeks that followed, the fallout from the scandal continued to ripple through both Jason's and Evelyn's lives. The contract was officially awarded to a rival company, and the boards of both Apex and Vanguard were in disarray. trying to manage the aftermath. For Jason and Evelyn, it was a time of deep reflection and soul-searching. Jason threw himself into his work, trying to repair the damage to his reputation and regain the trust of his colleagues. He worked long hours, determined to prove that he could rise above the scandal. But no matter how many late nights he spent at the office, he couldn't escape the hollow feeling that had taken root inside him. Evelyn, meanwhile, was struggling in her own way. The loss of the contract hit Vanguard hard, and she felt responsible for the part she had played in it. Her once unshakable confidence was shaken, and she found herself questioning everything she had once believed in. The rivalry with Jason that had driven her for so long now seemed petty and meaningless in the face of what they had lost. But despite the chaos and regret, neither Jason nor Evelyn could stop thinking about each other. They had tried to distance themselves, try to focus on their careers and move on. But the bond they had formed was too strong to simply be forgotten. One evening, as Jason sat alone in his office, he found himself staring at his phone, his thoughts drifting to Evelyn. He missed her sharp wit, her intelligence, her passion. He missed the way she challenged him, pushed him to be better, and he knew, deep down, that he wasn't going to be able to move forward without at least trying to make things right. Taking a deep breath, Jason picked up his phone and sent Evelyn a message. "Can we talk?" Evelyn's heart skipped a beat when she saw Jason's message. For weeks, she had been trying to convince herself that distance was what they needed, that they both needed time to heal and rebuild their lives. But seeing his name on her screen brought all the emotions rushing back. She hesitated for a moment, her finger hovering over the keyboard. But then, before she could second-guess herself, she typed out a simple response: yes. They agreed to meet at a small, quiet cafe on the edge of the city, the kind of place where they wouldn't be recognized or interrupted. When Evelyn arrived, Jason was already there, sitting at a table by the window, staring out at the bustling street. As she approached, Jason stood up, his expression a mix of relief and uncertainty. "Evelyn," he said softly, his eyes searching hers. "Thank you for coming." Evelyn nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "I wasn't sure if I should," she admitted, sitting down across from him. "But I think we need to talk." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything that had happened between them hanging in the air. Finally, Jason spoke. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For everything. I never meant for things to get so out of control. I never wanted to hurt you or ruin your career." Evelyn looked down at her hands, her throat tight. "I'm sorry too," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll let things get out of hand. I should have been more careful, we both should have." Jason reached across the table and took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "I miss you, Evelyn," he said, his voice raw. "I've spent the last few weeks trying to fix things, but nothing feels right without you. I don't want to keep pretending that what we have, isn't real." Evelyn felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away. "I miss you too," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But I don't know how we can move forward, Jason. We've already lost so much." Jason squeezed her hand, his gaze intense. "We've lost the deal, but we haven't lost each other. I think we need to stop seeing this as a competition. We're stronger together, Evelyn. We always have been. Maybe it's time we started working with each other instead of against each other." Evelyn looked at him, her heart aching with the truth of his words. "But what about our companies? What about everything we've worked for?" Jason shook his head, a determined look in his eyes. "We'll figure it out. Maybe it means changing how we do business, or even leaving our companies behind. But I'm willing to take that risk if it means being with you." Evelyn was silent for a long moment, her mind racing. Could they really do this? Could they really put their past behind them and build something new? Something better? It was a terrifying thought, but also an exhilarating one. Finally, she took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay," she said, her voice steady. "Let's figure it out. Together." Over the next few weeks, Jason and Evelyn began to cautiously rebuild their relationship, this time with a new understanding. They were no longer rivals, no longer locked in a battle for dominance. Instead, they started to see each other as partners, both in their personal lives and, tentatively, in their professional endeavors. It wasn't easy. There were still challenges to overcome, old habits to break, and wounds to heal. But they were committed to making it work, and slowly, they began to find their way forward. They started by meeting secretly to discuss how they could collaborate in a way that would benefit both of their companies without compromising their integrity. Jason suggested they look for opportunities where Apex and Vanguard could work together on projects that aligned with both of their values. It was a risky move, but one that could potentially pave the way for a more cooperative relationship between their companies. Evelyn, for her part, used her influence at Vanguard to push for more collaborative approaches, proposing joint ventures that would allow both companies to share resources and expertise. It was a radical shift from their previous cutthroat competition, but it was one that started to gain traction as both companies began to see the benefits of cooperation. Outside of work, Jason and Evelyn took the time to really get to know each other, away from the pressures of their corporate lives. They went on long walks, had dinners at out-of-the-way restaurants, and spent quiet evenings just talking about their dreams, their fears, and their hopes for the future. For the first time in years, they allowed themselves to imagine a future that wasn't defined by their rivalry or their careers. They talked about what they wanted from life, and slowly, they began to see that they wanted the same things: a life filled with passion, purpose, and most importantly, each other. As the months passed, Jason and Evelyn's relationship grew stronger, both personally and professionally. Their companies, once bitter rivals, began to collaborate more closely, benefiting from the new approach that Jason and Evelyn had championed. Their partnership became a symbol of what could be achieved when competition gave way to cooperation, and both Apex and Vanguard saw their profits and reputations grow as a result. But for Jason, there was still one thing missing, one final step he needed to take to make things right. One crisp autumn evening, after a particularly successful joint venture meeting, Jason asked Evelyn to join him for dinner at a small, elegant restaurant overlooking the city. As they dined, the conversation flowed easily, filled with laughter and the comfortable familiarity they had developed. As dessert was served, Jason reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, his heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't planned on doing this tonight, but as he looked across the table at Evelyn, her eyes sparkling, her smile lighting up the room, he knew he couldn't wait any longer. "Evelyn," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "these past few months with you have been some of the best of my life. We've been through so much together, and we've come out stronger on the other side. I can't imagine my life without you, and I don't want to." Evelyn's breath caught as she realized what was happening. Her eyes widened, and her hand flew to her mouth as Jason slid out of his chair and dropped to one knee. "Will you marry me?" he asked, opening the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring. For a moment, Evelyn was too stunned to speak. She had never imagined this moment. Not like this, not after everything they had been through. But as she looked into Jason's eyes, filled with love and hope, she knew that there was only one answer she could give. "Yes," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Yes, Jason, I'll marry you." The restaurant erupted in applause as Jason slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling with emotion. He stood, pulling Evelyn into his arms, and kissed her, long and deep, as if sealing the promise they had just made to each other. It was a moment of pure joy, a moment that marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. A chapter that was no longer defined by rivalry or competition, but by love, partnership, and the belief that together they could overcome anything. Jason and Evelyn's engagement was met with a mix of surprise and support from their colleagues and friends. Some were skeptical, still wary of the history between them, but most were genuinely happy for the couple who had found love in the most unexpected of places. Their wedding, held a few months later, was a small and intimate affair, attended by close friends, family, and a select few colleagues who had supported them through their journey. It was a beautiful day, filled with laughter, tears of joy, and the promise of a bright future ahead. As they stood together, hand in hand, Exchanging vows under a canopy of twinkling lights, Jason and Evelyn knew that they had come a long way from where they had started. They had faced challenges, made mistakes, and nearly lost everything. But in the end, they had found something far more valuable than any business deal or corporate success. They had found each other. In the years that followed, Jason and Evelyn continued to build their lives together. They worked side by side, creating new ventures that combined their talents and passions. Their companies thrived, no longer as competitors, but as partners in a shared vision for the future. And through it all, their love only grew stronger. They traveled the world, explored new ideas, and started a family, cherishing every moment they spent together. The rivalry that had once defined their relationship became a distant memory, replaced by a deep and abiding love that only grew stronger with time. And so, as the years passed, Jason and Evelyn lived their happily ever after, not as enemies, not as rivals, but as soulmates who had found each other in the unlikeliest of circumstances. Together, they faced the challenges of life with courage and grace, knowing that as long as they had each other, they could overcome anything. Their story was a testament to the power of love, the strength of partnership, and the belief that even in the darkest of times, there is always the possibility of a new beginning. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Please don't forget to like, comment, and share for more delightful stories.